Hello, and welcome to episode 124 of the Reconomy podcast, where we discuss economic issues that impact real estate, housing, and affordability. I am Odetta Kushi, Deputy Chief Economist at First American, and here with me is Mark Fleming, Chief Economist at First American, and Xander Snyder, Senior Commercial Economist at First American. Hi, Mark. Hi, Xander. Or should I say welcome back, Xander?
Hi, Odetta. It's good to be back.
Hello, everyone. And so in context here, before we dive into the episode, let me first say, yes, welcome back, Xander. For those who are keeping score at home, Xander's been away for a little bit. We missed you dearly, my friend, because he just had a baby. Woohoo! How's new parenthood treating you, Xander? You look bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. That's a good start.
Yeah, so far, so good. Baby's doing well. My wife's doing well. And I'm really enjoying those precious hours with the little one after work. It's a sweet, precious time, and I've been told that these times go quickly.
Trust me, yes, they do. You know, it feels like just yesterday.
Okay, Mark, we don't have to start the episode by waxing nostalgically here.
Fine. I don't have to wax nostalgically, but I might wax on and then wax off, no?
And the 80s references, they come today even before the economics.
Terrible.
Yeah, but I did set you up for that one. But
indeed.
Back, Xander. Welcome back to the 80s references.
Good to be back. Nothing's changed in the world since I've been gone, right?
No. All is quiet here, but maybe just a couple things here and there. But since we're focusing on commercial real estate today, maybe we'll talk about a little change there. So we'll discuss the ongoing rebalancing of the industrial commercial real estate market today. We know that for several years, the asset class was the darling of the pandemic. There was never enough of it, and both industrial property prices and rents increased at record rates. Now, though, it kind of seems like the market is softening.
Yeah, that's right. The industrial market is in many ways sort of a victim of its own success. And as a brief recap, early in the pandemic, e-commerce sales surged, which drove historic demand for industrial space. So think warehouses and logistic facilities. As you said, there wasn't nearly enough space to go around. And so developers responded by building a lot more of it. In fact, industrial construction hit all-time highs in 2022. And now a wave of new supply is coming online. A lot of it's already available.
And this really is, in a lot of ways, a good example of a classic economic business cycle. Strong demand drove up prices, then supply increases in response to that higher price to meet that demand, and eventually catches up, but perhaps overshoots and exceeds the demand. And when that happens, prices fall to attract more demand, and so the cycle begins again.
Right. And, commercial real estate typically follows cyclical patterns like this when you look at it over the long term.
That's right. So, Xander, it takes two to tango? No? Another Karate Kid reference? No? But of course, I mean the supply and demand tango to create the cycle.
My eyes are going to get tired from all the rolling. Now, back to our regular scheduled podcast programming. And that dance between supply and demand is not always synchronized well as we move through the real estate cycle. Today, we're going to be discussing one measure of demand that can provide insight about where in that cycle we currently are. And that metric is called net absorption. And it's a measure of demand to lease space. The term isn't widely used outside of the real estate industry, so we'll first break down exactly what it means. Then we'll examine the latest trends in industrial net absorption to better understand where industrial real estate currently sits within the context of a longer-term cycle.
Okay, so as it's usually my job to provide the definitions, net absorption measures the overall change in occupied space from one period to the next. To do that, you first add up all the new or existing space that is leased. Then we subtract from that all the space that has been vacated during that same period. That's the net part of it. The difference between space occupied and space vacated is net absorption, and it measures how much total demand to occupy space has changed over time.
Yeah, that's right. And, just to reiterate, that net part of net absorption means it's capturing activity both in and out. So space taken and space given up. So if you only considered space that was leased without considering space that was vacated, you'd be talking about gross absorption, which is still a useful metric, but it doesn't quite tell the full story of demand in a market like net absorption does.
Okay, so now that we've got the definition, let's turn to the industrial sector. What exactly stood out about industrial net absorption in the second quarter of this year?
Well, in the second quarter, net absorption for industrial space turned negative, which means that more space was vacated than was occupied. And this is the first time that this has happened in 15 years, since the second quarter of 2010.
That's a long stretch. And before we get too scared by the negative number, what's behind the change?
Well, a number of industrial tenants are in the process of cutting costs in the face of greater near-term uncertainty with respect to trade policy and supply chain logistics. Some companies are consolidating their operations, and this was reported on a number of earnings calls for industrial real estate investment trusts, or REITs as they're referred to. And more than one industrial REIT remarked that tariff uncertainty is making their tenants cautious about locking in long-term financial commitments.
I mean, that makes sense. After all, industrial properties like warehouses and logistics centers are woven into the fabric of modern supply chains. Shifting trade policy can impact where companies need that sort of space.
But it is also worth mentioning that this isn't just a question of quantity of demand for industrial space. It also has to do with where that space is needed. I'm reminded of we have to always talk about real estate, residential or commercial, as location matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether that will shift in the future from where it is today. As an example, if domestic substitutes of some tariff goods become popular and they are produced primarily in the Midwest, then demand for warehouse space might move away from, say, port cities to be nearer to that production. The point is, demand for industrial space can rise and fall, but it can also move to new locations to meet changing needs in those supply chains.
Yeah, now that's a key point. Negative net absorption, it does indicate that less space is needed, but it can also reflect tenants moving to new locations with upgraded facilities or improved logistics. So notably, negative net absorption of industrial space is happening after that massive amount of new supply has hit the market. So you'll remember that the definition includes new space leased as well. Now, developers started all of those new projects in response to pandemic-era demand. Now, though, demand is softening, and that demand might not end up matching up geographically with where all those newest buildings actually are.
That's a really interesting point. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the demand aspect of industrial leasing, but let's just go back to the supply side for a minute. We briefly mentioned at the top of the show that a lot of new supply of industrial has recently been delivered to market, and that wave is not quite over, but it's getting close. Does that record-breaking new supply change how we think about that second quarter negative net absorption read?
Yeah, I think it does. When there's an abundance of new options, tenants are able to move into better, newer spaces, right? Negative net absorption then can also be about downsizing or a flight to quality rather than just weaker overall demand. As an example, you can think about a company that might be upgrading from a 75,000 square foot warehouse to a more modern warehouse that's only 50,000 square feet. But perhaps that smaller, more modern warehouse lets them manage the same scale of operations that they had that they have going on for lower rent. Even if the price per square foot is higher, the overall rent might be lower. So in that case, the demand to lease space is still present, even though the net amount of vacated space was 20,000 square feet.
That's a great point on the efficiency that causes these numbers to change. So negative net absorption isn't exactly great news or not necessarily great news, but it could mean good things. In other words, not bad news either. And while it does indicate softening demand, it can also reflect relocations or tenant flight to quality, which makes it a more nuanced indicator than it may at first seem.
I think that's exactly right. I'd say right now, it appears to be both of these things. Demand is softening, and also all of those other things are happening simultaneously.
So in short, industrial real estate is going through a rebalancing, a supply and demand tango, if you will, after several years of red hot growth. All that new supply added to the market combined with supply chain uncertainty, it's all driving a softer leasing environment right now.
Yeah, and it will certainly take some time to fill some of this new space. But in the long term, the core drivers for industrial demand are still present. Rising e-commerce spending, the need to modernize supply chains and in some cases relocate them, as well as nearshoring of certain types of manufacturing activity. All of these drivers will still be present even as the market adjusts to this recent surge in supply.
So let me try and wrap this all up. Industrial real estate is entering an adjustment period. There's an unprecedented amount of new space hitting the market and demand is softening. This led to industrial's first negative net absorption rate in 15 years. Tenants are becoming more selective, supply chains are shifting, and some developers are dealing with the consequences of building during a boom that's now cooled. The result is a more nuanced and challenging market, which will take skill and caution to navigate. But nevertheless, those long-term demand drivers for industrial space remain. Did I get that right, Xander?
I think that's a good summary. Good
All
work.
right. A plus. Thank you. It's so great to have you back, Xander, to have these kinds of conversations. And thank you for joining us on this episode. We really look forward to having you back soon. And if you want more information about this topic, you can check out Xander's latest blog on our Econ Center. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Reconomy podcast. If you have an economics related question you'd like us to feature in the future, you can email us at economics@firstam.com. And as always, if you can't wait for the next episode, you can follow us on X. It's at Odetta Kushi for me, at M Fleming Econ for Mark, and at Xander Snyder X for Xander. Until next time.